it's the people versus the establishment, the city trader Putin admiring professional politician who's pals with crypto billionaires versus Count Binface.
PMQs Unpacked on Times Radio, unpacking the politics and cutting through the crossfire.
I'm joined by the Sunday Times' Deputy Political Editor, Lara Spirit. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Ed. How are you?
And I'm joined by the Times columnist, Matthew Syed. Or maybe not. He's not here yet, but he's going to be here shortly. A reminder, you can watch along on the Times YouTube channels. Just go to YouTube and search for PMQs Unpacked. While we wait for our first question, Lara, it's been a busy 24 hours to say the least. Do you expect Clacton to come up today?
I think it'll be interesting to see. Obviously, it's not Keir Starmer today. He has one more Prime Minister's questions left before he leaves Downing Street. It's, of course, David Lammy, the Deputy Prime Minister. I think this will be quite an interesting. Session, nonetheless, because we have seen some, I would say, difficult coverage in recent days about some of David Lammy's most dearly held policy issues. So, for example, the early release of child sex offenders, that's been a big issue per the early release scheme that was debated in Parliament yesterday. I think it'd be interesting to see whether Lammy is asked about that, as indeed he may be about the jury trial reforms, which have been very controversial, but which was another thing that I reported at the weekend that Andy Burnham is set to shelve.
Interesting what might come up. We've just been discussing with Lara whether or not Clacton will come up in the by-election. At an opportune moment, we've been joined by Matthew Syed. Welcome to the show.
What a pleasure to be here, Ed, in a different studio. I've got to say, the seat that I am on feels like it's about a foot lower than the one that you two are on.
You can actually, I was in that last week, you can actually bring it up.
I have tried with a couple of levers, but what
on that one?
It doesn't feel like it, Matthew. It is.
Well,
it is a foot lower.
Yes.
And we've had Robert Crampton for the last hour complaining about it, and now we've got you complaining.
And you didn't sort it out. What kind of a host are you?
Well, I tried.
So I heard that you're obviously a highly talented politician.
Well, they're calling me.
This may be an overstatement.
They're calling me the supply teacher now.
Because you're kind of substitute coming off the bench.
Yeah, I'm sort of hopeless. Yeah.
But you've got to say in the foot. I mean, I don't know if it will come up, but I don't know how you feel about sport. But
I thought you were talking about the chair. Sorry.
Well, you as a substitute coming in, as it were, for Hugo.
What do you want to say about sport, completely off any topic that we really want to discuss? But let's give you your moment.
Sport is integrated, is it not, into the cultural firmament? But has it not been a marvellous summer? And I think it could come up, could it not, at PMQs, the fantastic England victory against Mexico, the fact that we're in, I think, a difficult moment as a country, and yet there is a tremendous sense of euphoria and hope and optimism that we can still go further in this competition.
I think you're absolutely right, Matthew. Some Labour backbencher will make a terrible analogy between the government's successes and the England football team. Don't you think, Lara?
I could see it happening. Yeah, I could see it happening. I mean, you could even see it in one of the main exchanges. They love talking about sport. Keir Starmer loves talking about sport. One thing I actually quite liked was Kemi Badenoch saying that she wasn't going to be staying up for the England match.
Yes, I like it.
I thought that was a really smart play from her,
it's like
because it's honest, and so you should just be honest about those things.
It refused to say she was going to watch Adolescence. I thought that was a good moment as well.
But I mean, when I've sat in endless focus groups where she has come up, and people do think that she is quite a genuine politician, and I think moments like that do cement that.
I can't say that I'm particularly supportive of not staying up. I stayed up. I let my kids stay up, and I think it will be an unforgettable experience for them. But by the way, how many PMQs has Starmer still got to go?
One left.
Is this the last one today?
He's not
doing it. If you turned up on time, Matthew, you'd know A, it's David Lammy doing them this week, and B, our incredibly on top of it all Deputy Political Editor told us that his last PMQs is next week.
Well, it gives me an opportunity. It gives me an opportunity to say, and I know that perhaps listeners and to Times Radio and readers of the Times and Sunday Times are not, I think, judging from the reader comments and the polling, not huge fans, it's fair to say, of Starmer. I think he is a decent man who inherited an invidious position of a country in debt and has done an extremely difficult job. I think Burnham will face all the difficulties he has, but I have admiration. Look, Ed, you stood in politics. I stood once in 2001. I've been asked by the Conservatives to stand again. I'm probably going to bottle out, but I have admiration for people who have the courage to put their names. So we comment on it, don't we, Lara? We as it were, snipe or adjudicate from the sideline, but actually to go out there and take the swings and arrows, and it is a toxic environment. I think I have admiration for anyone who does that.
Who did you stand for in 2001 and where?
Well, I stood on it's a good question. 2001 is Blair's second election, and it was a fantastic manifesto in Wokingham against John Redwood, who you might remember nicknamed the Vulcan. I once described him as the Vulcan in a debate at the Methodist Church Hall in Reading Town Centre, and he jumped up from his seat and he looked at me in the eye and he said, "I want to make one thing absolutely clear. I am not an alien." and I looked at him and I could see he was deeply offended by this sobriquet, but I caught the eye on the front row of the chairman of the Conservative constituency party, and he looked at me and mouthed, "He is."
I think there's nothing better than standing for Parliament. I can't believe you're probably going to bottle it at the next election.
I mean, a lot of the politicians say that it would be a mistake.
Well, they're wrong. You'll be an excellent candidate and an excellent MP. I think you should do it.
Very kind.
You've only got one life. Come on.
That's true, but it's enjoyable to write columns and books, and this is a great thing. Do you not feel, being on the radio, reaching out?
It is a great thing, but that's after politics. I think you should do the politics first and then come back to the writing and the columns.
Would you ever stand, Lara?
I don't think I would, no. I actually really can't think of anything worse. But that's
two
one of the
alternative views here. For
that is one of the reasons why I do share your admiration for people that do, because I fully recognise, obviously being on the other side of it, but just how miserable and often lonely. I think one of the things I find speaking to MPs, which I do for a living, is just how lonely so many of them are. I mean, really the grind of late votes. Do you know why are you sort of smiling, Ed?
Also, Lara, I can see Ed, his facial expression is difficult.
He thinks I'm not lonely.
To describe, but also, do you not think frazzled often if you're in a green room, for example, on Newsnight, and you're talking to politicians in advance of going on to air, the journalist can take a step back and look at the strategic picture, and it feels to me that they are scrolling through social media trying to figure out what line might get virality.
Yes.
Completely up against the tyranny, if I can put it that way, of 24-hour news and the instant gratification in the information ecosystem that we have at the moment. It is not a place that is easy to make the big long-term bets that I think we need now in an age of AI, energy transition, more than quantum computing. I mean, we need a long-term vision.
This conversation has ranged far and wide, but it's now time to go to Deputy PMQs. We're going to hear the Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy, and his opponent today is none other than James Cleverly. Let's hear the first question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to echo the Right Honourable Gentleman's tribute to Sir George Howarth and pass on my party's condolences to his friends, family and loved ones. I also wish to echo his support and encouragement to the England football team in their forthcoming match against Norway. And of course, I will echo his words about those people murdered on 7/7, their friends, their families, but also pay tribute to the emergency services that did so much on that day. Will he apologise to the victims of the rapists, sexual predators and paedophiles that he is planning to release early?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to welcome the Shadow Housing Secretary to the dispatch box. He, of course, could have been doing this job every week if he were better with numbers. He's the Foreign Secretary. He was the Foreign Secretary in government that botched Brexit, the Home Secretary in a government that decimated neighbourhood policing, and one of the shortest-serving education secretaries in our history. Now, he asks about a very serious issue, and every decision we have taken has been based on public safety and delivering justice for victims. Let's talk about the context. The last Labour government built 28,000 prison places. We're building 14,000 by 2031. We've already delivered 3,200. Under the Tories, they closed 23 prisons. 23. Gloucester closed. Shrewsbury closed. Portsmouth closed. Holloway closed. North Allerton closed, and what are they now? A block of flats. That's why we have to have an early release scheme. That's why we passed the Sentencing Act, and we're putting community powers locally to make sure that we protect the public.
Well, that was the first question, and Lara, you correctly predicted that the early release of child sex offenders could come up. It's something that's been dogging government spokesmen during the week. How do you think that exchange went?
Yeah, so I think one of the reasons this has come up is in part because I reported at the weekend that Andy Burnham is not minded to release child sex offenders as part of the scheme. That's something that those around Burnham are really concerned about. They're looking at a way to exempt child sex offenders from the release scheme, which is being rolled out from September on a rolling basis. Of course, Lammy mentions the context there, which is that there is undeniably a prison capacity crisis right now. Yeah. But Burnham clearly does not want to be releasing child sex offenders as one of his first acts in government. It is going to be complicated because they are looking at the Sentencing Act right now. They need to work out exactly how they're going to be able to do this. But this particular round of early release is obviously different to the ones that we've seen before, where there had been certain categories of offenders that had been excluded from that. There are the very most severe tier of criminals will not be eligible for this one. But it is the case that, and we've seen reporting of this, that victims of this abuse have been getting letters saying, basically, prepare for the release of your perpetrator. I mean, that is not an easy political position for Andy Burnham to be in when he arrives in Downing Street.
Matthew, it's interesting, David Lammy straight out of the blocks with kind of pre-scripted lines about James. Cleverly, kind of, he wanted to start knockabout straight away.
Yes, indeed. Which is, what do you make of it? I'm not terribly keen on it, if I'm honest. But, I mean, if I can pick up on one word, perhaps, that you mentioned, Lara, which was capacity. My sense is that this issue is really the defining one of British politics today. We don't have the capacity in our prisons, and so we're having to do invidious things, notwithstanding the particular topic that came up today. But it's the same across the board. We have an economy that is not growing. We have expectations of social services, not just the prison system, but the court system, the education system, the health system, the pensions, the welfare, and we can't afford it. I mean, some of these things I think we shouldn't have been paying for. Anyway, welfare has expanded, I think, beyond all reason. But our indebtedness is also providing a capacity constraint because the bond markets don't want to see us borrow anymore. And it is that, I think, that makes it so invidious to be in politics today. During a period of growth, you get these positive sum psychological dynamics where you can do more for different people at the same time. When there's no growth, it is a zero-sum context where giving something to one person means taking something for somewhere else. This is what worries me, if I may say so, about the Burnham vision. I don't think there is a clear... There hasn't been a vision for growth, really, over the last 16 years. That's what I would like to see. Yeah,
great, and growth in prison places. I mean, the interesting thing about PMQs is whether the interlocutor, in this case James Cleverly, the Shadow Housing Secretary, keeps on one topic or whether he's going to skip around. Let's hear whether he starts to focus on this or moves to another topic with his second question.
He makes a joke about use of figures. Let me give him a figure. 50,000 prisoners released early in just 2 years on his watch. And I am genuinely shocked, Mr. Speaker, that when given the opportunity to apologise to victims, he very publicly failed to do so. And let me remind him what this is about. Let me quote Fiona Goddard, herself a victim of grooming gangs, who has been brave and open about how his policy will impact her. And she says, "Finding out that they may be released early has completely set me back. I have barely left the house. I feel constantly anxious, frightened, and unsafe. I can barely sleep." This is the impact his policy is having on victims. He refuses to apologise. But why is he pursuing a policy which he must know is both wrong and dangerous?
This is a very serious issue, and the Honourable Gentleman is experienced in this House. He knows that while he was Home Secretary, they had an early release scheme that set out 10,000 offenders, 10,000 under his... They had 6 schemes within a year. They had a scheme that they announced on the 6th of June 2023, another scheme on the 17th of October 2023, another scheme on the 8th of March 2024, another in April, another in May, another in June, all before the election, and that's why Rishi Sunak, it's rumoured, called the election in the first place. They left a system with just 83 empty cells. That's what the Justice Secretary previous to me inherited when she came into office. That's why we had to pass a sentencing scheme. He hasn't said what they would do now to fix the system. Of course we think of every victim. And that's why we're notifying victims in discussion with all victims. I sat last week in my surgery with a victim of grooming gangs. All of us want to see offenders locked up. That's why we've got to have prison capacity.
So I thought that was quite a sort of statesman-like response from David Lammy, and it kind of emphasised that this is not necessarily a strong issue for the Conservatives, grooming gangs being issue number 1 and early release schemes being issue number 2. So I think Lammy is getting the better of James Cleverly in that exchange, Matthew.
Well, I think this goes to the absolute heart of the political predicament the Conservatives are in, because almost any critique they can offer of this government, the government can turn around on the issues that were raised there, but everything else, immigration, illegal immigration. We didn't stop the boats under the Conservatives. Growth was low. I think that government was a really shockingly poor government, the 2010 to 2024 government. And I think the only way to deal with this is almost a rebranding. To say, yeah, we got it wrong. It was disastrous, but we are new. This is what Blair did in 1997. He managed to, as it were, cultivate in the public mind that even though he had stood on the longest suicide note, by the way, in 1983 on the Foot Manifesto, that the Labour Party had been reformed by Kinnock and had been transformed by Blair. In that way, I don't know, I actually went back and watched some of the campaign election programmes in 97. Blair's great ability was to say that there was a watershed between the Foot era, even the Kinnock era, and the Blair era. Well, I don't think the Conservatives are going to get to the right place unless they actually, in a certain sense, rebrand.
Let's just focus on the specific issue of child sex offenders. I mean, it's an obvious issue for James Cleverly to go on because it's very topical, but he does have this Achilles heel, doesn't he? Because Lammy can come back with 6 early release schemes.
Yeah, I mean, look, the ones that have been championed is probably an unfair word. The ones that have been designed and implemented by the Labour government are more significant, right? I mean, that is just true. And the fact that it is being loosened come September, I think is another point of weakness for David Lammy and for the government, because I mean, I think the Conservatives can credibly claim that they probably wouldn't have included child sex offenders on the list of those who would be released early. There are plenty of Labour MPs and people that I've spoken to that are very likely to be in senior positions in the Burnham government who think also that this should not be part of the early release scheme. And indeed, yesterday we saw a vote that, it was an opposition day debate. The Conservatives led it. There was a vote on early release scheme, and Labour MPs were not voting for this to go ahead. So this is obviously a weak point for the government on this particular
Let's
issue.
see if the third question carries on the theme. I'm putting Lammy ahead just on points at the moment. Let's see if James Cleverly comes back.
Mr. Speaker, he talks about 10,000 early release over 14 years of Conservative government. They have released 50,000 in 2 years. And he knows it's wrong. He is a good man. He must know that it is wrong to release 5,000 serious criminals, including rapists, including paedophiles. And not only does he know it's wrong, but his party knows it's wrong. 400 Labour MPs and not one voted to support the government's policy in the vote last night. They know it's wrong. The country knows it's wrong, but he insists on pursuing it anyway. So if he will not change course, will he at least make this guarantee that not one rapist or paedophile will be released early later on this year?
He hasn't proposed what they would do if they were in office. They released 10,000 with 4 different schemes. No impact assessment when they released them. No victim contact when they released them. No warning. They did it on the sly. And let us be clear. Yes, we've got more probation officers. They, of course, cut probation, decimated it because of Chris Grayling. We've invested $700 million in probation. We're rolling out the largest programme of tagging in our history. We're forcing offenders to stay boxed in certain areas rather than where victims are. We're creating alcohol, pub, football and driving bans. We're implementing income reduction orders, and we're expanding chemical castration for sex offenders. None of it happened when they were in power.
So, again, I think it's interesting. Cleverly is kind of using a sort of human touch. You must know David Lammy, you know, you're a good guy. You must know this is wrong. But it's, again, Lara, I feel he's giving Lammy an opportunity to say, we're following the same scheme you did as Tories, but we're actually doing it better.
I don't know if I agree, to be honest. I think that ultimately you have a shadow minister who's able to literally say, can you guarantee that you're not about to release rapists and paedophiles? And you have the minister who is unable to say that. I mean, that to me, I'm sorry, is the basic takeaway from this exchange at the moment. I think the manner of their presentation is different, but what I suspect we're getting onto as well is the question of this is something that Andy Burnham might do differently, i.e. people in your own party have recognised,
yes,
as he alluded to there with the 400 MPs. So I think
400 MPs who didn't vote on the Tories' motion last night, they abstained.
I mean, last week when I was looking at this, I genuinely could not believe when I was getting calls that this was actually going to happen.
Okay,
I mean, literally, when Burnham people were saying to me, we're looking into this, we're a bit worried about this, I was thinking, something's wrong here. This isn't actually going to happen. This isn't actually part of the early release scheme. And it is.
That is really interesting, Lara, because basically I'm getting lost in the detail, and the point is the headline, you can't release a child sex offender if you're the government. It's just, there's no argument.
Well,
and that's all the public's going to see.
That's an extremely cogent point that you make, but I'm guessing, I mean, it seems to me that you're looking at the least bad of some truly terrible options in order to deal with this capacity constraint. So I think it's not quite right merely to critique what the government is doing. One has to come up with an alternative.
Which is what Lammy is saying, of course.
An alternative proposal that remediates the issue at hand without leading to what you rightly point out is a completely politically unacceptable eventuality. My own view is that it's extremely difficult to do.
Yeah, well, let's see.
I think that is true. Just really, really quickly, like he is right. They are trying to expand monitoring in a way that other governments haven't, and they are actually investing in new prisons as well. So that's what they would say on that.
That takes time,
which does take time, exactly, in their defence.
Well, let's see. I mean, I was going to say to a certain extent, it felt by the third question they were going around in circles. Let's see whether the fourth question takes us any further.
Mr. Speaker, he will look back on this exchange, and I think he will be shocked by how this is coming across. No apology to the victims, no guarantee that paedophiles and rapists will not be released early. We all know that releasing dangerous criminals on purpose is the wrong thing, but not content with doing that, he is hell-bent on releasing dangerous criminals by accident. Last year, in response to the questions from my right honourable friend, the member for South Suffolk, he claimed that under Labour he had got a grip of accidental releases. Yet we now know there have been more accidental releases in the last 2 years than in the entirety of the last Parliament. So I give him another chance. Will he apologise to the country for his abject failure at keeping prisoners in prison where they belong?
I've got to say, this is rich coming from the honourable gentleman.
Exactly.
They had 14 long years in power. They wrecked neighbourhood policing. He was Home Secretary. Prisons were at bursting point. That's why they called the general election. And they let out offenders in secret. And that is why we have the Sentencing Act that passed through this House and the House of Lords. What we're doing is we are getting thousands more bobbies on the beat. We're toughening up probation. They decimated it. And we have to have the space to knock up dangerous criminals. That's why we passed the sentencing bill.
Well, Lara, I think what you said on the third question is proving to be correct, that actually what James Cleverly is doing here is he's getting the message across, regardless of the nuances, regardless of the record, that Labour refuses to say whether they're going to release child sex offenders or not, and now he's moved it on as well to accidental releases. So it's clearly his take, and he said to David Lammy, you'll look back on these exchanges and think, did I really say that? His take is the headline from this exchange is going to be Labour still won't be clear about their policy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a dream issue for the Conservatives. The headline is about releasing child sex offenders early. The subtext of this is that the MPs that are sat behind David Lammy on those benches don't want to do that and decided not to vote with the government yesterday. So clearly, this is basically just a dream for James Cleverly, and it's a really difficult issue. And the other reason why it's quite a good issue for them to talk about is that for Andy Burnham to fix this is not going to be easy. I mean, it is going to take a lot of work, and there is a capacity crisis. They are going to have to work very hard to do this. Perhaps it will need new money. Who knows? I think people would say it's a good thing that there has been a recognition that this is something that needs to be addressed. But even so, this is not going to be something that when Andy Burnham arrives, the Conservatives are going to stop talking about.
Yeah. Although there's still a sense that, can James Cleverly string this out to 6 questions? I mean, he's moved it slightly on, Matthew, to accidental releases now, but it's effectively going to be the same exchanges on 5th, 5 and 6 if he carries on.
Well, I don't think this will make any difference. You're right, it'll be a bad headline for Labour. I just think it'll wash over. People, I think, will probably glimpse from this exchange that there are more criminals, as we discussed, than there are prison places, so you have to release some very nasty people. They're releasing the wrong people, according to Cleverly, but the reason there are so few prison places and too many criminals is partly a legacy of what the Conservatives did. I think most people will be watching that. Very few people will be watching it. I think it'll have zero effect on
No, we'll see.
Most political popularity of the party.
Most listeners texting in are not that impressed. Let's hear what the 5th question is and how that goes.
The Speaker, it's the dangerous criminals that he is letting out early. So he refuses to apologise to victims, he refuses to guarantee that sexual offenders and rapists will not be released early. Another thing that the country and indeed this House knows instinctively is wrong is his personal crusade to scrap trial by jury. We know that it will not clear the backlog. We know that it undermines fundamental British freedoms, and we know the legal profession is united against it. So will he now admit that it is wrong, and will he commit to reverse his proposals to scrap trial by jury?
Well, let's be clear, Mr. Speaker. There is no proposal before this House to scrap trial by jury. The honourable member needs to do better and get on the detail. There is a threshold change. There is a threshold change. Margaret Thatcher made a change to jury trials. David Cameron made a change to jury trials. The vast majority of criminal cases in this country are dealt with by magistrates, again, which they cut. We're restoring the magistrate, and they can do more. We're investing in our courts. They ran our courts down. We're modernising our courts. We're introducing digital ID, and we need reform.
Well, there you go. He has changed the topic, but it is staying on criminal justice issues, as predicted by Lara Spirit, this time on jury trials, which I do think is a policy that is looking pretty fragile, potentially under the new regime.
Yeah, I mean, I reported at the weekend that Andy Burnham has privately conceded that he doesn't want to go ahead with this. So I think it is vanishingly unlikely that they survive the end of this government. And I think it's probably quite likely that we see a new Justice Minister, but let's see. I think it's worth noting, during the Makerfield by-election, Andy Burnham himself referred to the right to trial by jury as a linchpin of a fair society. He asked Starmer to pause the reforms. He said, I understand the pressure on the courts, but this is about a fundamental part of our country. It has to proceed with broad consent if it's to proceed. I think the implication of that is that it doesn't have broad consent currently. It has been it's been among the most controversial issues that this government has faced, certainly, and we saw the abstention of, I think, close to 100 MPs, Labour MPs, on this particular issue, on the promise of
including Carl Turner, who sort of lost the whip.
Subsequently lost the whip over, yes, and I think it has not been an easy issue for David Lammy or for the wider government. And again, you have the further point here, which is that David Lammy is not championing these reforms because he wants to. There is also a capacity crisis in the courts, and that is one of the big things that the government wants to address. But I think this is going to be perhaps slightly more complicated than the earlier release for Andy Burnham to get right, because the courts and tribunals bill that's going through at the moment is actually, there are parts of that Labour MPs love.
Yes.
So I think one of the things Andy Burnham's team are trying to work out at the moment is just how do they make sure that even if they scrap some of these more controversial aspects of the bill, like jury trials, they can still maintain the other parts, and that's quite a live issue.
I'm going to bring you in, Matthew, on the policy side, but let's just get the sixth question out of the way, then we have longer to discuss the policy side, because I do find this scrapping of jury trials quite an interesting issue. Let's hear the sixth question.
Mr. Speaker, he talks in glowing terms about what he's claiming to do. What we are actually seeing this government doing is stripping money from where it's needed and squandering it on the welfare bill, which has ballooned by £20 billion this year alone. And he talks about getting over the detail. Here's a simple detail for him. When I was Home Secretary, we had more police officers than at any point in British history. Since taking over, that number has dropped by over 2,000 officers. Mr. Speaker, at the dispatch box last week, my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, highlighted this government's failure to defend us internationally. Today, I have outlined his failure to defend us domestically. If the soon-to-be Prime Minister... Is he in the room anywhere? No. If the soon-to-be Prime Minister does not want to be complicit in his failure, he should come out and condemn this plan, not just hint that he opposes it. Because if Labour cannot protect the citizens of this country, either domestically or internationally, then what on earth is the point of them?
Mr. Speaker, he insists on proving that he can't count. We lost 16,000 police officers when they were in power. Mr. Speaker, the British people haven't forgotten what the party opposite did to our country. After 2 years of a Labour government, I'll compare our record every day of the week. Their record is the biggest fall in living standards in recorded history. Our record is the biggest upgrade to workers' rights in a generation. Their record is wrecking our criminal justice system. Our record is bringing down violent crime. Their record is millions of people stuck on NHS waiting lists. Our record is cutting NHS waiting lists, the fastest rate in history. Their record is cutting defence. He was a reservist. They hollowed out the armed forces. Our record is the biggest boost to defence spending since the early 1990s. And their record is plunging hundreds of thousands of children into poverty. Our record is lifting 500,000 of children out of poverty. I'll take our record over theirs any day of the week.
So, a nice peroration there from David Lammy, comparing the record of the Tories with the record of Labour. It went broad on the last question, Matthew. He didn't kind of double down on jury trials per se, but he basically, cleverly's line is, you're not looking after us at home, just as you're not looking after us abroad. Lammy's line is, what are you talking about? We're so much better than you.
I found that very depressing as an overall exchange between two leading politicians. And in a way, I agree with Cleverly and with Lammy. Lammy's right. The defence spending was cut successively, I think 6 straight years in a row under David Cameron. The so-called peace dividend, while the Conservatives were taking money from Russian-linked donors and putting out the red carpet for Abramovich and the oligarchs, that was a violation of the national interest of a kind that I felt was grotesque and criticised all the way through. The world is no safer than it was during the Cold War. In some ways it is more dangerous than it ever has been. And I think the Conservatives did extremely badly. But Labour, what they're arguing over here, if you look at it from a systems perspective, if I can put it that way, they're just arguing about the least bad options that are available to them and squabbling over which is which, cleverly doing his best to pretend that there's only the option that Labour have chose without putting forward an alternative. It just, as I say, it felt like Groundhog Day, it felt depressing. interesting. It also was psychologically interesting that it seems to me that Lammy, in a way, as with all Labour spokespeople, are trying to ventriloquise for the Prime Minister in waiting. This is a government that has no tangible power, and so we're in a very strange and surreal situation politically. But the only solution, and it's a very difficult one to operationalise, is to generate compound economic growth. That's the way we get out of this.
And they didn't mention that, Lara, did they?
I didn't hear compound economic growth mentioned.
Or just growth. We don't need to have the...
How did you think it went? Final word to you, Lara, on who...
I mean, I think I disagree with you on this. I think it wasn't... I don't think it would go down as one of David Lammy's best performances, and I think more substantially they have a very, very difficult set of questions to ask themselves on the early release scheme in particular, and Andy Burnham will obviously have to answer them, and I don't know if David Lammy will like the answer to that.
Now let's take a look at the other exchanges at Prime Minister's Questions. The Times Politics newsletter editor Stefan Boscia has joined me. What have you got, Stefan?
Well, the first question we have is the Deputy Lib Dem leader, Daisy Cooper, who's going to be asking the question that I think most people are probably talking about today in Westminster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I associate myself and my party with the Deputy Prime Minister's tribute to Sir George Howarth, his remarks about the 7/7 bombings and all those who live with the consequences of that terrible day, and wish England good luck for Saturday evening. And as the UK braces for its 7th Prime Minister in a decade, can I also thank the Deputy Prime Minister for our exchanges and wish him well in whatever role he may have. Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Clacton used to say... Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Member for Clacton used to say, leave means leave. But it seems his latest stunt is to leave this place just so that he can return as a fully fledged member after not just one referendum on his behaviour, Mr. Speaker, but possibly 2. So will the Deputy Prime Minister join us in urging the Chancellor to delay the Honourable Member for Clacton's resignation until the investigation is complete, so the good people of Clacton have all the facts before they cast their votes? And failing that, will he support our Clacton clause so that even once the Honourable Member ceases to be an MP, the investigations can continue?
Well, everyone can see that the Reform leader is just trying to distract from the fact that he's up to his neck in sleaze. He's got serious questions to answer and he can't run away from them. Labour isn't going to be part of this circus. I hear it's the people versus the establishment, the city trader Putin admiring professional politician who's pals with crypto billionaires versus Count Binface. There have been unqualified joke candidates in the past. Let's see what the people of Clacton decide.
Well, a bit of a gift of a question there, and I quite like the line, leave means leave. It was a good opening.
Yeah, absolutely. And you could just feel that when she asked the question generally, that the mood of the place lifted, and this is really what people want to be talking about. I think it was quite a dour exchange before that about prisons, but this, everyone's having a laugh. It's clearly what, parties on all sides want to be attacking Farage on. But I don't think Nigel will mind that too much. I think that can be clipped up pretty easily if socials say, look at these people laughing at us. This is the establishment I talked about. So everybody wins here, right? I think, to be honest with you. And I think that this is, the sort of areas where Nigel will have the chance to make those points, because frankly the contest itself isn't going to be that. And I think the best thing that the other parties could do, particularly Labour, is just sit back and let the sort of madness go on around them.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, because obviously you can kick Nigel Farage when he's not in the chamber, but we've had a few texts during the show saying you're all smug metropolitan Liberals being rude about Nigel Farage. He could turn this to his advantage, Lara.
Yeah, although I wonder if they'll be clipping up Putin apologist.
Crypto-loving.
But I agree, I completely agree with that from Stefan. I think that was a very good point, and I think it probably serves everyone's ends. And in a way, surprising that it took so long for them to get onto what is the biggest issue in Westminster today.
He's not a popular man, Nigel Farage, in the House of Commons chamber, though, is he, Matthew?
No.
You can sense that from the heckling that went on.
That's true. He's an insurgent.
Yeah.
I don't think he minds that at all, being a lone voice. But this is a very significant issue. My feeling was that Reform had the momentum to potentially win a majority. They were the bookies' favourites at the next general election. That would have been a major watershed for the whole country. I think this corruption story is highly significant. I think it is tainting the individual, without which Reform have absolutely no chance to win power. The other thing is the rise of Restore. Farage, I think, used to love being the voice who could say the unsayable, but now there's somebody outflanking him to the right, amplified by Elon Musk, and that is stealing a huge amount of thunder, particularly online. I think that's significant.
Well, let's move on to the next best of the rest, Stefan.
We have the Green MP, Dr. Ali Chand.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our politics needs fixing fast. The broken, outdated first-past-the-post system has clearly failed to deliver stable government. We urgently need to rebuild trust in our democracy and ensure that everybody's vote counts equally. So does the Deputy Prime Minister agree with the Right Honourable Member for Makerfield that proportional representation is an idea whose time has come? And does he agree with me and members across this House that time is now, before the next general election?
Well, I'm very pleased that she raises the issue of votes and democracies. But I've got to say this to the Greens. During the local elections, a Green councillor in Lewisham described me and the Shadow Foreign Secretary as coconuts. Her party looked the other way, kept her candidate in post, and have rewarded that candidate with a council job. I'm not making this up, the Cabinet Member for Healing. The Greens could start a healing process by stopping such racist language.
The two of them speaking cross currents there. I mean, I think they're two significant issues, and issues which will, in their own way, be important over the next few years. I mean, one, the idea of electoral reform. You know, Andy Burnham has said he is committed to this, and I think this is going to be a really key issue over the next few years, and a big battleground, and whether this goes in the manifesto and what form that takes for the Labour Party. And then the other one, I think, which has been damaging for the Greens, is some of the unsavoury characters they've let in over the last few years, the sort of remnants of the Corbynites who have come in and been accused of anti-Semitism, in this case accused by the Deputy Prime Minister of racism against him personally. I think this is something that I think we're seeing with the polls already starting to be dragged down, and I think that might continue.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's interesting, isn't it, that Andy Burnham has put PR sort of front and centre, Lara.
Well, so he doesn't want to do it before the next election, and this has been one of the key issues that he has sort of slightly changed tack on, or at least I would probably use the word clarified his position on. That's despite some of his close allies being huge fans of electoral reform, and it is something that Andy Burnham does support, but during the Makerfield campaign he made it very clear that wasn't something he wanted to do before the next election. So that at the moment is on ice, but it's interesting, and it's interesting to hear them question it, because it is something that he very clearly believes, and he's not disavowing those beliefs at all. So I imagine it will come up more and more from parties in the so-called Progressive Alliance that Andy Burnham also speaks much of. And
just a quick bit of despair from you, Matthew. I mean, the PR point, but then David Lammy straight into a pre-prepared script, anti-Green script.
I think it's just worth saying. My view is that electoral reform would be a disaster. It'd either be a distraction or a disaster. We need, I think, now more than ever before, strong government. We don't want a coalition. We've got to make massive strategic bets that go against popular opinion. We need it even more than during the Thatcher era. The moment people don't want to hear that we need to cut welfare, we need to end the triple lock, we need to end NIMBYism, we need to build, we need to go against vested interests and not allow them to veto nationally beneficial projects. The only way to do that is strong central government. I would be taking more power to the centre and perhaps even declaring a state of emergency. You know, I'm not saying that I'm against democracy, but democracy, frankly, is not working for the Western world at the moment. And, you know, in a way, we need governments to be unpopular, and that will never happen with a wishy-washy, mushy coalition government.
Possibly including the Greens, Stefan.
That's right. I mean, there'd be an argument for, certainly not PR, which wouldn't deliver majorities, but something that they have in Australia, my home country, preferential voting, probably is a bit more equitable. You still get majorities there, and you can still have, a coalition-free government to drive through change.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Well, I just don't think it worked. I don't think it worked. I mean, Labour had a massive majority, couldn't get through its backbenchers, the key reforms. We're vetoed. We're snookered at the moment.
I mean, it is interesting that the Greens brought up PR, and I was surprised when I heard that Andy Burnham had kind of committed, in theory, to PR, and I think it is a massive change that people aren't really talking about. And, you know, he's our next Prime Minister, so it's a big deal. It's definitely on the table.
Yeah, look, Andy Burnham is in this difficult position where he doesn't want to have a general election, but nor has he won one. So he is pledging his allegiance to the existing manifesto, the Labour manifesto of 2024, while also promising a great deal of change. And that will be the central tension of the Andy Burnham premiership.
Do you think he will is it possible that he could make a significant difference with the arithmetic on the backbenches?
Well, I mean, he says when he's asked about this, and he did do an interview with LBC which covered part of this last week, that there was sort of room for creativity on tax, for example. I think was something close to his words. Stefan will correct me if I'm wrong, but it was on the front page of the Times the following day. But so there are parts of this where, perhaps on North Sea, for example, I think there might be wiggle room that strays slightly beyond the bounds of the manifesto, perhaps. So I think they will test the limits of the manifesto.
They
definitely
will test the limits.
Yes.
By the way, I think he's a nice person. I don't know if you've met him. I remember I mentioned Andy Burnham when I stood in 2000.
I took Andy Burnham to see Chelsea against Everton in 2003 when we sat in the West Stand, which was still being built in at Stamford Bridge. So Andy Burnham and I go back, way back, and I just checked whether I was still in touch with him. I've got 2 mobile phone numbers for him. I don't know if they work. But I suspect that the mood of the studio is that this was not a particularly inspiring Deputy Prime Minister's questions. We covered the early release of sex offenders, we covered jury trials, we had a laugh with Leave Means Leave and Nigel Farage, and we had a bit of an earnest discussion about proportional representation, which led to a discussion about whether we should abandon democracy and declare a state of emergency. That's the kind of live discussion you get on Times Radio when we discuss PMQs. I've had some brilliant
sarcasm in what you're saying there. He doesn't sound sincere, does he?
We've had some brilliant guests. Matthew Syed, the Times columnist, Deputy Political Editor of the Sunday Times, Lara Spirit, and Stefan Boscia, who's going to be in your inbox in a couple of hours. I kid you not, because he's going to send you his PMQs Unpacked roundup. And if you haven't subscribed to that yet, you have time. Go to thetimes.com/newsletters. You will not be disappointed.